My name is Ree, and on March 15th, I realized that 3 years of dedication meant absolutely nothing when weighed against one woman's bruised pride. I was standing in my office at 7:00 a.m., sorting client files, when Evangeline Beaumont stormed through my door like a tempest in Louboutin heels. Her flawlessly sculpted face was twisted in fury, her emerald eyes flashing as she aimed one diamond-studded finger straight at me. "You will be terminated today," she hissed, her words laced with venom. "Last night at the Children's Hospital Charity Gala, you deliberately disrespected me. When I approached your table, you stayed seated like some commoner." The audacity. Her lips curled into a sneer that sent a chill down my spine. "My husband will hear about this immediately, and you'll have your desk cleared before lunch." Something inside me snapped as I realized my entire career was about to unravel, simply because I hadn't stood up fast enough when the CEO's wife passed by. 3 years of growing the international division from 2 clients to 47. 3 years of working weekends, missing family dinners, pouring my heart into this company, all obliterated because Evangeline Beaumont's ego couldn't tolerate what she saw as an insult. Before I continue with what happened next, take a moment to tell me in the comments if anyone has ever tried to ruin your career over something utterly ridiculous. Because what I'm about to share is the most satisfying revenge I've ever witnessed, and you need to hear every detail. Also, please like this story, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. Stories like this deserve to be heard. Let's rewind to how it all began. 8 months earlier, I was browsing freelance tutoring websites, looking for extra income to help pay off my student loans. My degree in international business came with a specialization in Mandarin Chinese, thanks to 2 years I'd spent studying in Beijing during college. I was fluent, but more importantly, I grasped the cultural nuances most Western learners completely missed. That's when I saw the posting on Elite Academic Services, an exclusive tutoring platform for affluent clients. Someone required intensive Mandarin lessons twice weekly at their home. The pay was incredible, $300 per session. No name was listed, just an address in the priciest part of the city and very specific demands: complete discretion, professional appearance, and absolute confidentiality. I applied under my maiden name, Reese Morgan, rather than my married name, which appeared on all my official documents. I styled my hair differently, wore glasses I didn't usually need, and dressed more conservatively than my standard office attire. When you work for ultra-wealthy clients, they often prefer their staff to blend into the background. The penthouse was stunning. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, and everything inside screamed luxury. That's where I first met my student, though I had no clue who she truly was. She introduced herself simply as Eva, and her demeanor told me everything I needed to know about how she regarded people like me. "You're here to teach me Mandarin," she said, without even a greeting. "I need to be conversational within 6 months, not just basic phrases. I need to conduct business meetings, negotiate contracts, and sound sophisticated. Can you do that? Or should I find someone else?" I nodded politely. "Absolutely." "What's your current level?" She waved her hand dismissively. "I know some words. Let's just start." Within 10 minutes, I realized Eva barely knew anything. She mispronounced basic greetings, mixed up tones entirely, and grew visibly frustrated whenever I corrected her. Yet, she was determined. I'll give her that. Every session, she pushed herself relentlessly, though she treated me like nothing more than a highly paid servant. "Bring me coffee next time," she'd command at the end of lessons. "And make sure you use the service entrance from now on. The doorman shouldn't see tutors coming through the main lobby." I needed the money, so I smiled and nodded. $600 a week was worth swallowing my pride. As months went by, I learned more about Eva's motivations. She was preparing for what she called the deal of a lifetime, a joint venture with Chinese investors worth $50 million. She had convinced everyone in her social circle that she was fluent in Mandarin, that she had studied it extensively, and that she was perfectly suited to handle international negotiations. "My husband thinks I'm naturally gifted with languages," she boasted during one session. "Everyone at the country club is so impressed when I sprinkle Mandarin phrases into conversation. They have no idea how business really works." The irony was brutal. Ava could barely form a coherent sentence in Mandarin. Even after months of intensive lessons, every word had to be written phonetically for her to pronounce correctly. Her grammar was rudimentary at best, yet she lived in a fantasy where she was this polished international businesswoman. Meanwhile, at my day job, I was doing the work she pretended to do. I had built our company's Asian market division from scratch, spoke with Chinese clients daily, handled complex negotiations, and personally closed deals worth millions. But Eva, still a complete mystery to me as Evangeline Beaumont, was merely playing make-believe with her husband's money. The breakthrough came 6 weeks before that dreadful morning in my office. Ava was rehearsing her presentation for the Chinese investors, and it was catastrophic. She couldn't recall basic business terms, kept confusing yes with no, and spoke in gibberish with unearned confidence. "This isn't working," I said gently. "You need more practice with fundamental concepts before attempting complex negotiations." Her face flushed crimson. "Are you saying I'm stupid?" "Not at all," I assured her. "Mandarin is incredibly difficult. Most people need years to reach business-level fluency." "I don't have years," she erupted. "This presentation is everything to me. It's my chance to prove I belong in the business world, not just as some trophy wife. You have to make this work." That was the first moment I glimpsed genuine vulnerability in her. Beneath all the arrogance and entitlement, there was someone desperate to be taken seriously. I actually felt a pang of sympathy for her. "We'll work extra sessions," I promised. "I'll create phonetic scripts for your entire presentation. You can memorize it word for word." Her relief was immediate. "You can't tell anyone about this." "Of course not," I assured her. Client confidentiality was sacred to me. Over the next 6 weeks, I essentially rewrote her entire presentation in phonetic Mandarin. We practiced for hours until she could recite it flawlessly, even though she still didn't grasp what she was saying. I prepared backup materials, alternative phrases for different scenarios, and even coached her on proper bowing techniques and cultural customs. During this period, she started treating me a little better, not as an equal, but at least like a valued employee rather than disposable help. She would offer me drinks, ask about my background, and occasionally say, "Please" and "Thank you." "You're quite good at this," she admitted one evening. "Where did you learn to speak so fluently?" I explained my studies in Beijing, my business degree, and my work in international markets, careful to omit company names or any details that might link me to my day job. "Impressive," she said, though her tone suggested she still saw me as hired help who just happened to be educated. "You should consider working for a real company instead of just tutoring." If only she knew. 2 weeks before the investor presentation, Eva was finally finding her rhythm. She could deliver the entire pitch smoothly, answer basic questions, and even handle small talk about weather and travel. She was far from fluent, but she could fake it convincingly enough for a formal business meeting. "I'm going to be magnificent," she declared after our final practice session. "Those investors won't know what hit them. This deal will change everything." I smiled and packed up my materials. "You've worked incredibly hard. I'm sure it will go well." That's when she made the comment that would haunt me later. "You know, I'm attending a charity gala this weekend. It's for the Children's Hospital, and all the important business people in the city will be there. I'll finally be able to show off my language skills to everyone." My heart sank. The company I worked for was a major sponsor of that same gala. I'd be there representing our international division, seated at our corporate table. There was a strong chance I'd see Ava, though she still had no clue who I really was. I considered canceling or warning her somehow, but I couldn't figure out how to do it without revealing my identity. Besides, what were the odds we'd actually interact? It was a massive event with hundreds of attendees. The gala was stunning. Our company had secured an entire table near the front, and I was seated with senior management and their spouses. I had chosen an elegant black dress, styled my hair in an updo, and worn contact lenses instead of my usual glasses. I looked entirely different from the conservative tutor Ava knew. Halfway through dinner, I spotted her across the room. She was radiant in a dazzling silver gown, commanding attention at what was clearly the most prestigious table in the venue. She was animated, gesturing expressively as she spoke to those around her, even from a distance. I could tell she was having the time of her life. Then I saw him, the man sitting beside her, nodding and smiling as she spoke. My blood ran cold as recognition hit me like a freight train. Ava was Evangeline Beaumont, the CEO's wife, the woman I had been tutoring for 8 months, married to my boss. I spent the rest of the evening in a daze, barely touching my food, praying she wouldn't notice me. When dessert was served, I excused myself to use the restroom, hoping to avoid any chance encounters. But fate had other plans. As I returned to my table, Evangeline was walking directly toward me, heading to greet someone at a nearby table, and our paths would intersect in seconds. I quickly sat down, staring intently at my plate, willing her to pass by without seeing me. That's when everything went wrong. "Ree?" a voice called. "Ree Hatterson." One of my colleagues was trying to get my attention from across the table. I looked up automatically, responding to my name just as Evangeline walked past. Our eyes met for exactly 2 seconds. I saw a flicker of confusion on her face, like she almost recognized me but couldn't quite place where from. Then the moment passed, and she continued on. I thought I was safe. I thought those 2 seconds of near recognition wouldn't matter. I was catastrophically wrong. The next morning, she stormed into my office with murder in her eyes, and I finally understood what had happened. Evangeline had spent the entire night trying to figure out where she knew me from. When she couldn't place my face, she convinced herself that I had deliberately snubbed her by not standing when she passed my table. In her mind, some random employee had disrespected the CEO's wife at a charity gala, and that could not be tolerated. "Pack your things," my boss said, after Evangeline finished her tirade and stormed out. His face was grim, and I could see the conflict in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Ree, I really am. But I can't have this kind of drama at home." I stared at him in disbelief. "You're firing me because I didn't stand up fast enough when your wife walked by. She says I deliberately ignored her, that I made her look foolish in front of important people. That's insane. I was eating dinner and didn't even realize she was there." He sighed heavily. "It doesn't matter. She's made up her mind, and arguing with her will only make things worse for both of us. I'll give you excellent references and make sure you get a generous severance package." I felt my entire world collapsing. 3 years of perfect performance reviews, countless successful deals, and relationships with clients who trusted me completely. All of it meant nothing because Evangeline Beaumont's pride had been wounded. That's when inspiration struck. "Before I go," I said calmly, "there's something you should know about your wife's big presentation with the Chinese investors." I walked to my computer and opened my email account. With a few quick clicks, I sent him a message with video attachments from every single tutoring session I'd recorded for my own reference. "Check your email," I said quietly. His face went pale as he opened the first video. There was Evangeline stumbling through basic Mandarin phrases, asking me to repeat everything phonetically, admitting she didn't understand what she was saying. "She's been lying to you," I continued. "For 8 months, I've been her private tutor. She can't speak Mandarin beyond memorized scripts. Everything she's told you about her language abilities is completely false. I removed my glasses and let my hair down, transforming back into the person Evangeline knew as her tutor. I'm Ray's Morgan, I said, and effective immediately. Your wife's Mandarin lessons are cancelled. The silence in that office was deafening. My boss sat frozen, staring at the computer screen where his wife was clearly struggling with pronunciation that any first-year language student would master easily. The video showed her asking me repeatedly to write everything in English letters because she couldn't read Chinese characters. This presentation is in 3 days, he whispered, his voice barely audible. I know, I replied. I helped her prepare every word of it. She's memorized it like a script, but she doesn't understand what she's saying. If anyone asks her an unscripted question in Mandarin, or if she needs to deviate from her prepared remarks even slightly, the whole thing will collapse. He looked up at me with something between horror and disbelief. Why didn't you tell me who you were during the lessons? Client confidentiality, I said. She hired me through a tutoring service under strict privacy agreements. I had no idea she was your wife until last night at the gala. Even then, I planned to keep her secret because that's what professionals do. But since she's decided to destroy my career over an imaginary slight, I figure those confidentiality agreements are void. Wait, he said, standing quickly. Don't leave yet. We need to discuss this. There's nothing to discuss. Your wife made her choice. I'm just making sure you understand what that choice actually costs. I walked toward the door, then paused. Those Chinese investors aren't just bringing money to this deal, they're bringing their top executives, their translators, and their cultural liaison, people who will immediately recognize whether your wife can actually communicate or if she's just reciting memorized phrases. The door closed behind me with a soft click, and I walked out of that building for what I thought would be the last time. But I was wrong about that too. The next 3 days passed in a blur of job applications and angry phone calls from Evangeline. Apparently, my boss had confronted her about the tutoring sessions, and she was furious that I had betrayed her trust. You signed confidentiality agreements? She screamed in one particularly vicious voicemail. I'll sue you for everything you have. I called her back once, mostly out of curiosity. Actually, Evangeline, you should read those agreements more carefully. They protect client privacy from outside parties, but they don't prevent tutors from defending themselves when clients try to destroy their careers with false accusations. I never made false accusations. You told your husband I deliberately disrespected you at the gala, but you and I both know you didn't even recognize me there. You're ruining my reputation based on a completely fictional story you created in your head. The line went silent for a long moment. Then she said, You're still fired. Yes, I am, I replied. And your presentation is tomorrow. Good luck. I hung up and tried to put the whole mess behind me. I had bigger problems to worry about, like finding a new job and explaining to potential employers why I had left so suddenly. But I couldn't stop thinking about those Chinese investors. Some of them were people I had worked with professionally over the past 3 years. Mr. Cheney from Beijing Manufacturing, who always started meetings with personal questions about family, and Miss Lu Hong from Shanghai Logistics, who appreciated cultural references and traditional greetings. They were coming to this presentation expecting someone who understood their language and business customs. Instead, they were about to meet Evangeline Beaumont, relying on her memorized script and her complete ignorance beyond basic pronunciation. The morning of the presentation, I woke with a knot in my stomach, imagining how it would unfold, how quickly the investors would see through the facade, and how badly it would reflect on everyone involved. Around 10, my phone rang. It was James Morrison, my former boss, sounding desperate. I need your help. I don't work there anymore. Remember, the investors are here early. They want to have lunch before the presentation, and Evangeline is panicking. She can't handle casual conversation in Mandarin. She's locked herself in the bathroom and won't come out. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. That's unfortunate, but it's not my problem anymore, I said. I'll give you your job back. Full reinstatement, a promotion, a raise, whatever you want. Just help us get through this presentation. I considered it for exactly 3 seconds. No, please. This deal is worth $50 million to the company. If it falls apart, we'll have to lay off half the international division. Then you should have thought about that before you fired me for not standing up fast enough when your wife walked by, I replied. I know I made a mistake. I was wrong, and I'm sorry, but please don't let our employees suffer because of my bad judgment. That hit me harder than I expected. The international division wasn't just my work. It was built with amazing colleagues who didn't deserve to lose their jobs because of this mess. I'll make you a deal, I said. Finally, I'll come in as a consultant one time only. I'll help with translation during the presentation, but I'm not doing it to save Evangeline's reputation. I'm doing it to protect the people who still work there. Thank you. Thank you so much, he said. And James, after today, I never want to see or speak to your wife again. I arrived at the office 45 minutes before the presentation was scheduled to begin. The main conference room had been transformed into an impressive setup with multimedia displays, translated materials, and elegant catering that respected Chinese business culture. Evangeline stood near the windows, quietly practicing her opening remarks. She looked beautiful and professional, but I could see the terror in her eyes the moment she noticed me. What is she doing here? She hissed at her husband. Helping to save your presentation, I replied calmly. Unless you'd prefer to handle the Q&A session on your own. Her face went pale. We both knew she couldn't manage unscripted questions. Fine, but you stay in the background. This is my presentation, my deal, my moment. Understood. The investors arrived exactly on time, as I had expected. Dr. Chen Wei greeted me in Mandarin, and I responded appropriately, introducing myself as a consultant supporting the presentation. Miss Liu Hong asked about my experience in Chinese markets, and we had a brief, pleasant conversation about trade relationships. Evangeline watched our exchange with growing anxiety. The investors were comfortable with me, but when she tried to join the conversation with her stilted, rehearsed phrases, their polite smiles became strained. Perhaps we should begin the formal presentation, Dr. Chen suggested in English, clearly sensing the awkwardness. Evangeline took her position at the front of the room and launched into her prepared remarks. I had to admit, months of practice had paid off. Her pronunciation was decent, and she delivered the memorized content with confidence. The investors listened politely, taking notes and occasionally nodding. Everything seemed to be going according to plan. Then Miss Liu Hong raised her hand. Excuse me, she said in Mandarin. Could you clarify the logistics timeline for the Shanghai distribution center? Evangeline froze. The question wasn't part of her script. I'm sorry, she said in English. Could you repeat that? Miss Liu Hong repeated the question more slowly and clearly. Evangeline looked at me desperately. I could have helped her, translated the question, and coached her through an answer. But I stayed silent. I think, Evangeline stammered, attempting to respond in broken Mandarin that made no grammatical sense. Dr. Chen Wei frowned and exchanged glances with his colleagues. They were beginning to realize something was very wrong. Perhaps, Dr. Chen said diplomatically, we could continue the discussion in English, but the damage was already done. The investors had come expecting someone who could communicate effectively in their language, someone who understood Chinese business culture and could facilitate smooth international cooperation. Instead, they discovered that their primary contact had essentially lied about her qualifications. Miss Liu Hong asked another question, this time in English, about regulatory compliance in Shanghai. It was a simple question that anyone involved in Chinese business should have answered easily. Evangeline had no idea what to say. She looked at her husband, then at me, then back at the investors, panic clearly written across her face. "Perhaps my consultant could address that?" she said weakly. I stepped forward and answered the question thoroughly, explaining the regulatory framework, recent changes in compliance requirements, and best practices for foreign companies operating in Shanghai. The investors nodded appreciatively and immediately began directing their follow-up questions to me instead of Evangeline. For the next 20 minutes, I essentially ran the presentation, answering detailed questions about logistics, cultural considerations, legal requirements, and market analysis. The investors were engaged, clearly impressed with the depth of knowledge I was providing, while Evangeline stood to the side, completely sidelined at her own presentation. Finally, Dr. Cheney addressed the elephant in the room. "I'm confused about the structure of this partnership," he said carefully. "We were told that Mrs. Beaumont would be our primary liaison, but it seems clear that—" He trailed off, looking at me. "Patterson," I supplied. "Miss Patterson has the expertise we need for this collaboration. Could you clarify who would actually be managing this relationship?" The room fell silent. Evangeline's husband looked like he wanted to disappear, and Evangeline herself stared at the floor, her face bright red with humiliation. "I think," I said gently, "there may have been some miscommunication about roles and responsibilities. Perhaps it would be best to reschedule this discussion after the organizational structure can be clarified." Dr. Cheney nodded gravely. The investors gathered their materials and prepared to leave. Miss Lu Hong approached me privately. "We were very impressed with your knowledge and professionalism," she said quietly. "If you were to represent this company in future negotiations, we would be very interested in proceeding. However, we cannot work with someone who has misrepresented their qualifications so significantly." After the investors left, the conference room felt like a tomb. Evangeline sat in a chair staring at her hands. Her husband paced near the windows, and I gathered my notes, preparing to leave for good. $50 million, James said quietly. "Gone." "It was never really there," I replied. "You can't build international partnerships on lies and pretense. Those investors are too smart and too experienced to be fooled for long." Evangeline finally looked up. "This is all your fault." I turned to face her directly. "No, Evangeline, this is the consequence of your choices. You chose to lie about your qualifications. You chose to destroy my career over a perceived slight that existed only in your imagination. You chose to prioritize your ego over the success of this deal. I worked so hard on this presentation. You memorized words you didn't understand for a deal you weren't qualified to handle. That's not work. That's performance art." I walked toward the door, then paused. "For what it's worth, I actually felt sorry for you during those tutoring sessions. You seemed so desperate to prove yourself, to be taken seriously. But respect isn't something you can fake or demand. It's earned through competence, integrity, and treating others with basic human dignity." "You're still fired," she said weakly. I laughed. "Evangeline, after today, I wouldn't work for this company again if you begged me." But I was wrong about that too. 2 weeks later, James Morrison called with an interesting proposition. The board of directors had been less than pleased when they learned about the failed investor presentation and the circumstances surrounding my termination. Apparently, several board members had worked with me professionally over the years and were furious that I'd been fired over such trivial reasons. "We'd like to offer you the position of Vice President of International Business Development," James said. "It comes with a substantial salary increase, your own budget, and complete autonomy over the international division." "What about Evangeline?" I asked. "She's no longer involved in business operations. The board made that very clear." I considered the offer carefully. "I'll take it, but with conditions. First, I want a written guarantee that family members of executives cannot interfere with personnel decisions. Second, I want authority to rebuild the international division my way without interference from anyone. And third, I want a formal apology for my wrongful termination included in my personnel file. Absolutely, he agreed. 6 months later, I had rebuilt the Chinese investor relationship and successfully closed the deal Evangeline had destroyed. The Shanghai partnership was worth $68 million more than the original proposal and opened additional opportunities across Asia. Evangeline, meanwhile, had become a pariah in her social circle. Word spread quickly about her failed presentation and fabricated language skills. The same people who had once been impressed by her Mandarin phrases now whispered about her dishonesty and poor judgment. I heard she tried to blame me for sabotaging her presentation, but too many people had witnessed the truth. The investors themselves confirmed the issue wasn't sabotage, it was incompetence disguised as expertise. 8 months after that disastrous presentation, James approached me with a delicate request. The board is considering some changes in executive structure, he said carefully. They're impressed with your work rebuilding the international division and are wondering if you'd be interested in taking on additional responsibilities. They're thinking about creating a new position, Senior Vice President of Global Operations, overseeing all international business, including partnerships, acquisitions, and strategic planning. I smiled. That sounds like the kind of role that would report directly to the board. It would, he confirmed, and it involves significant authority over the company's international strategy. I pretended to consider the offer. I accept. 3 months later, I was officially promoted, making me one of the most senior executives in the company. My office was 2 floors above James Morrison's, and my authority spanned every international deal the company pursued. Evangeline never spoke to me again after that presentation, which was exactly what I hoped for, though I heard she'd started taking Spanish lessons from a different tutoring service, likely planning some new scheme to appear as an international business expert. I hoped her new tutor was more patient than I had been. The irony wasn't lost on me. Evangeline had tried to destroy my career because she felt I hadn't shown her proper respect, but her vindictive behavior had ultimately exposed her lies, ruined her business ambitions, and elevated me to a position of power she could never achieve. Sometimes the universe has a sense of humor. Looking back, I realized those 8 months of tutoring taught me something important about people like Evangeline. They're so focused on appearing important that they forget to become competent. They mistake performance for substance, arrogance for confidence, and entitlement for leadership. But the business world exposes pretense eventually. You can only fake expertise so long before reality catches up. And when it does, you better hope the people you've stepped on aren't in a position to step back. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever watched someone's lies catch up with them spectacularly? Have you ever stood up for yourself and faced consequences you didn't expect? Drop a comment below and tell me your story, because I have a feeling I'm not the only one who's learned that sometimes the best revenge is simply letting people face the natural consequences of their actions. And if you enjoyed this story, hit that like button and subscribe for more tales of workplace drama, unexpected twists, and the satisfaction of watching karma work its magic. Because trust me, this wasn't the last time I encountered someone who thought they could destroy others' lives without facing consequences themselves.